I defy any cloud to appear in the sky. Dare any raindrop to plop in my eye. On a wonderful day like this. Do you have any idea how hard it is to sing a love song looking at Roy Perfume? And on a wonderful morning like this, when the sun is as big as a yellow balloon, even the sparrows are starting to croon. On a wonderful morning like this, and on a morning like this, I could kiss everybody. Let me say furthermore, I'd adore everybody to come and dine. The pleasure's mine, and I will pay the bill. May I take this occasion to say, the whole human race should get down on its knees to show that we're grateful for mornings like these. Is this your first time visiting a Rotary Club?
Few times.
I wasn't going to sing, but when they started the singing, who's took the dong bump and the bong bong bing bong, I thought maybe I better sing, the world's in a rotary way, on a wonderful, wonderful day, like today. Yeah. I'm delighted to be with you again. It's a great honor for me to speak to this club, because my brother Roy was the president of this club a number of years ago. And now that we live in Livermore, we sold our large home in Fremont in Kimber Park and moved out here about a year ago to be with our son Rob, who's in the Pleasant and North Club, and other members of the family. And it's so nice to be back to this Rotary Club. It's a very vibrant club. I've spoken to thousands of clubs all over the world over the last 40 years. And this is the first time I ever saw a club conduct its major portion of business deciding which movie they wanted to see. Yeah, you obviously did a good job with this club. And you did a good job leading in that song. Who put the bump in the bump bump bing bong? I tell you, I'm going to remember that one for quite a while. I used to be with some old friends, Roy Perfito I've known for a century. I met Roy when he was young. And Bob Tucknott, of course. Everybody knows Bob Tucknott. He's a giant in the Rotary world. And I've known Bob 40 or 50 years. Ward Eccles was my dentist when he was in San Leandro years ago. I have a few teeth left. I've known Ward a long, long time, and it's a pleasure to be with him. And so many of you that have been past presidents of this club, it's good to see you again. I was thinking on the way over that every president of Rotary International has a theme. This year my friend Ravi from Colombo, Sri Lanka, has a theme, being a gift to the world. Next year's theme is serving Rotary serving humanity, my friend John Jern from Tennessee. And I took my theme from Charles Dickens' immortal classic, A Christmas Carol, mankind is our business. Now the people who create Rotary merchandise love these annual changes of themes. Because we put the themes on t-shirts, hats, pins, socks, underwear. Sherry and I have my Rotary theme in a Rotary wheel in the ceiling above the bed where we sleep every night. And it lights up every 2 or 3 hours and sings my theme song. A song of Rotary, we're in the business of mankind. And then of course it lights up. We sleep with an Alaskan Malamute, and he goes wow in tune with the song, then climbs under the bed and starts chewing on boxes. And in these boxes are Rotary neckties, because every president of Rotary International creates a Rotary necktie. And I wanted to, with this theme on it, and I wanted a tie that was a very fine woven silk, created in Como, Italy. I had a friend on the board of directors of Rotary who had a friend who was also a Rotarian, who owned a big factory in Como, Italy, where they create fine woven silks for men and women. And I wanted a woven tie that would keep a nice knot. And when these ties arrived in Evanston, our world headquarters north of Chicago, I took the tie to another friend of mine, a Rotarian, who's a buyer for Neiman Marcus on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And I said, what do you think? And he looked at that tie and he said, Rick, this is a fine woven silk tie. we would sell that tie for $150. So I gave these ties out to heads of state all over the world. We visited 43 heads of state, 28 of whom were very active in their own Rotary clubs. So we gave one to the Prime Minister of France, the Prime Minister of England, the President of Bulgaria. I gave one to President Chen of Taiwan, who had been in Rotary about a dozen years. He was so excited to receive this tie, I'm not kidding you, that he made me out a check for $5 million US, which I thought was a fair exchange. Fred, I was kind of hoping it was the speaker's fee. But of course it turned out to be a contribution from the government of Taiwan to our polio eradication campaign. I gave one of these ties to Pope John Paul II. I never saw him wear it, but I know he had one. When I was done, I had a whole bunch of these left over, and they shipped them out in a moving van to our home in Silicon Valley, in Fremont. And they're in cardboard boxes underneath the beds where we sleep now in Springtown, here in Livermore. And Sherry says every time I go to speak to a Rotary Club, she says, can't you get rid of another one? Can't you present another one of these sacred ties? So I want to give one of these ties to Fred, President-elect of this club, for inviting me to speak with you today. I
have a check for $1 million. Stay up there, Fred. Fred.
Oh, again? Oh, smile?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do like this. Here we go.
It's always nice to be invited back where you've spoken before. I was in Nairobi, Kenya, not long ago, my third trip to Kenya in Rotary work. I was speaking in the Nairobi Hilton Ballroom on a Saturday night to about 1,000 people who had gathered to address a conference dealing with Rotary's efforts in fighting AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. About 1,000 people were crammed into this ballroom. The fire marshal over there had either been bribed or had no idea what the limit was. And most of these people were from sub-Saharan countries, United Nations officials, and Rotary governors and club presidents and Rotarians from all of these countries in Africa, dealing with the subject of Rotary's work in preventing AIDS. When I finished my speech on this particular Saturday night, a bunch of people were lined up willing to shake my hand. And I saw a 10-year-old boy patiently waiting in line, about 20 minutes, dressed in a dark suit, a nice shirt and a tie, waiting patiently to shake my hand, tell me he liked the speech. This kid came, stood right in front of the podium, held out his hand with a lot of self-esteem, looked me in the eyes, and he said, "Mr. King, that's the worst speech I ever heard in my life." And I was a little taken back by that, Gabriella. What the heck, he's only 10, what does he know? A few others grabbed my hand, told me they liked the speech. I saw this kid standing in line a second time. And I thought, all right, his mother's made him come back to tell me he's sorry for what he said. Finally gets right in front of me, and he holds out his hand with a lot of self-esteem. Says to me, "I want to make sure you heard me the first time." That's the worst speech I ever heard in my life. And I thought, now I got to chastise this kid, because I know a lot of people think that when I'm through speaking, but you're really not supposed to say it. When they passed this for governor, grabbed my hand and said, "President Rick, don't pay any attention to this kid. He didn't even hear your speech. He just likes to go around the room listening to what all the other people are saying, and he likes to pass it on." Gabrielle, I know you're over 10, and I sure enjoyed your remarks. Thank you for your leadership in Iraq. Good to have you here. Every Rotarian comes to the club holding a classification, which means a job, a vocation, an occupation, a profession, vocation, something one did with one's work during working years. Or they had that vocation or classification before they retired, one or the other. I'm very proud of the fact that for 51.5 years, I occupied the same classification as our founder, Paul Harris. I was a very quiet, shy, sweet, humble, innocent, lovable trial lawyer, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed suing people. It was a lot of fun. And I enjoyed my work in courtroom. What is your date of birth, madam? July 15th. What year? Every year. How old is your son? The one living with you. Well, he's 38 or 35. I can't really remember which. Well, how long has he lived with you, lady? 45 years. What was the first thing your husband said to you when he woke up that morning? He said, "Where am I, Kathy?" And why did that upset you? "My name is Susan." Now, doctor, isn't it true that when a person dies in his sleep, he doesn't know about it until the next morning? I spent all night dreaming up that question because I like to sound very cerebral, intelligent when I'm cross-examining physicians. I like to cross-examine doctors. I sort of feel that I'm getting even for a lot of prostate exams. Do you recall the time, doctor, that you examined the body? Yes, Mr. King, the autopsy started around 8:30 p.m. And Mr. Dennington was dead at the time. No, counsel, he was sitting on the desk wondering what I was doing to him. Well, now, doctor, before you performed the autopsy, did you check for a pulse? No. Did you check for blood pressure? No. Did you check for breathing? No. Well, then it's possible that the guy was alive when you began the autopsy. No. Well, how can you be so sure, doctor? Well, for one thing, his brain was sitting on my desk in a jar. But a good lawyer never stops with a question like that. Doctor, couldn't the patient have been alive anyway? Yes, Mr. King, it's possible that he could have been alive and practicing law somewhere. So it's always a pleasure to be invited back, and I commend you for the service that you're doing. It was enjoyable listening to all of your projects. In my lifetime, I've been to a lot of Rotary clubs in 135 countries, and I've addressed Rotary clubs in every state of the Union, every province in Canada. And this spring I will be in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Boston, Massachusetts, Dallas, Texas, Seattle, Washington, all over the place in different times and places, talking to Rotary clubs about what they're doing in Rotary work. When I was in Africa, they took me to places where Albert Schweitzer worked. Albert Schweitzer joined Rotary when he was a relatively young man, and he had been in Rotary about 8 years in May 1960 when he wrote an article for the Rotarian magazine, and he called it "The Truly Human Man." And in the May 1960 issue of the Rotarian, Dr. Schweitzer said this, and I give you just a couple of sentences from his opening paragraph. "Having occupied myself since my youth with the great problems of civilization and its survival amidst the events which form this great adventure that we share in this world, I knew that there would have to be created someday associations of people aside from political parties, aside from every other kind of distinction, something solely to meet the ideal of the truly human man, who tries to judge as a truly human man, and who tries to act as a truly human man. And the first time I heard of Rotary, I said to myself, now they are beginning to do what is necessary for the future. And I've lived for this great concern for the future of humanity with my friend Albert Einstein, whom I knew for many years. And I know how much he too was waiting for a great movement. And now this movement has come in Rotary, and we shall fight on while remaining profoundly human. The two salient points, I think, are these. First, as I have traveled the globe many, many times over, I have come to the realization that Rotary, in the words of Albert Schweitzer, was correct. Rotary is necessary for the future. I had dinner on the banks of the Nile in Cairo not so long ago with a retired general from the Egyptian army in the Second World War, an old man, a Rotarian. And we were spending the evening having dinner, talking about Rotary's role in peace in the Middle East and the expansion of Rotary clubs in Middle Eastern countries. And he said something very interesting to me. He said, you know, Rick, in your part of the world, when you have a problem to solve, you come together peacefully in the capacity of a Rotary club or a Chamber of Commerce or a church group or a civic group, and you talk about ways to solve a problem. Whether it's a local problem or a global problem, you talk peacefully about ways to solve the problem. In my part of the world, he said, we don't do that. Instead, we kill each other. And then he went on to say, and until we have more Rotary clubs in the Middle East, we will never have the peace we so desperately seek. You see, this morning, as we meet here in the capacity of this vital club, Rotarians, Catholics, and Protestants are meeting in the same Rotary clubs on the borders of Ulster and Ireland. Hindus and Muslims are meeting together in the same Rotary clubs on the border of India and Pakistan. And throughout the Middle East, Arabs and Jews belonging to the same Rotary clubs are meeting together to talk about Rotary's global thrust in bringing about peace, one Rotarian after another, one person after another, one at a time. Every race, every color, every creed, every religion, every language, every politics, every culture, every ethnic background, every occupation of worthwhile worth, wear the Rotary wheel all over the globe. Princes and heads of state, executives, religious leaders, cultural leaders, social leaders, business leaders, athletic leaders, education leaders, entertainment leaders, people in every walk and profession wear the Rotary wheel. We are a vast, private United Nations doing work on a scale never before undertaken. In the words of one United States Senator, by a private organization and governments to solve people's problems across the globe. You all know what we've done in polio. We're almost done. I've spent 40 years of my life having been on the original polio committee, dealing with a disease that I knew nothing about until I made my first trip to India. And there, they took me to a little village sponsored by a Rotary club. And children in the village came and sang me a song in Punjabi. I sang them a song back in Las Vegas. We didn't understand each other's language, but we understood each other's heart, because music is a universal language. And all of these children had no idea how poor and desperate they were. They took my photograph with the kids. They gave me a Maharaja hat, and I felt very important. As I turned to go, one little boy who never made it in the photograph was crawling in the dirt, his legs dangling behind him, not working. I'd never seen this before in my life. This was 35 years ago. I said to my aide, "What's the matter with him?" "He has polio. He'll probably be dead within another year or two because he crawls on the dirt all day, on his elbows, which were bloodied, mosquitoes and all kinds of insects getting into his mouth, which kill people over there on a massive scale every day." He was trying very hard to get to me, and he came and he propped himself up on his elbows right at the base of my feet, and he looked up at me, and my aide whispered in my ear, "Rick, he wanted to be in the photograph." And so I took his photograph, and I've carried it with me every day of my life. You can't see his legs because it was a simple little point-and-shoot camera that my son Rob had given to me for Father's Day a number of years ago. Not one of these beautiful cameras we use these days. But I don't think you were supposed to see his legs anyway, because his legs didn't work. And I've carried this photograph with me every day of my life. I took it to court, I took it to church, I took it to the office to remind myself that this is really what my business is. To paraphrase one great religious leader, no compensation can ever make it up for it if we fail, no matter how successful we are in our business, in our occupations, in whatever else we do in life, if we fail in the business of humanity. It is the only business we're going to take with us after we leave this life. What we did to help others, and in so doing enrich our own lives, in the words of Albert Schweitzer's second point, becoming the more truly human man, the more truly human woman. We fight AIDS on a massive scale today. We fight malaria and measles and dengue fever. We distribute packets of dehydrated food into the mouths of hungry, starving children all over the third world who would never even dream of the kind of breakfast we enjoyed this morning. We fight illiteracy on a massive scale, the world's largest literacy program funded by Rotary, with a special emphasis on the third world girl child. Just not long ago, the girl child in those countries was ignored. Nobody educated the little girl. all the emphasis was on the little boy. But Rotary changed all that. And our emphasis is on educating little girls. We distribute wheelchairs, and I know some of you have been on wheelchair distributions. This district is doing a major drive this year. Ken Baring's one of the speakers at our district conference in April at the Black Hawk Museum. And this year we're sending containers of wheelchairs across the globe and down to Mexico. And I remember so many times being in places where we put somebody in a wheelchair, what it did for me. Now I've got 2 artificial hips in my legs and an artificial knee, so I don't really dance the way I used to. But I've never needed a wheelchair. And I remember with Chris Lewis, the son of the famed comedian Jerry Lewis, we were in New Jersey at a wheelchair distribution. And I was supposed to be the major speaker. And television cameras were there, and the governor sent somebody from the state offices there, and the newspaper reporters were there, and several hundred people were there to see Rotary distribute wheelchairs to children who needed them. We took a little girl, 4 years old, from her, 6 years old, from her father's arms. She'd been born with spina bifida, and she'd never walked or run in her life. We put her in a new red wheelchair. The room was divided in half. Half the people over here, half the people over here, with a center aisle right down the center. We put her in a wheelchair, Chris Lewis and I, right at the back of the room. And all of a sudden she realized she could move herself by turning the wheel. And up and down the center aisle, she moved her wheelchair, totally oblivious to the fact that a meeting was going on. And pretty soon you could hear a pin drop, because everybody in the room was looking at this little girl moving herself up and down the aisle. I put my speech back in my pocket, because nobody needed a speech then. The speech was right there in front of us. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And when we were done with the ceremony, her father came to me with tears streaming down his cheeks. And he said, "Mr. King, thank you for the wheelchair. Every time I carried her by a school playground, my heart broke, because her little brothers, who were there that day also with their mother and their father and their sister, were running and kicking and playing the ball, playing soccer on the schoolyard. And I know she wondered why she couldn't do the same. So you've given a gift not only today to my little girl, but to me, and to her mother, and to her brothers. Thank you, Rotary, for the gift." Somebody wrote a check for $75, matched by the Wheelchair Foundation, to put that little girl in a wheelchair. I turned to this father and I said, "Don't you thank me. I've never needed a wheelchair. My sons have never needed a wheelchair. My wife has never needed a wheelchair. I don't really understand the gift we gave to you, but I tell you this, I will take with me into eternity the gift the look on that little girl's face gave to me." Somehow in the process of all of this, we Rotarians become the more truly human man, the more truly human woman. Albert Schweitzer was right. And we dig water wells all over the globe. And we restore sight to blind people with cataracts, thousands of them in a weekend in third world countries. We build shelters. We've planted billions and billions of trees in Rotary's campaign to preserve planet Earth. We spent millions on college scholarships and on the Centers for Peace and Conflict Resolution. We fund Interact and Early Act and Rotaract and RILA and Youth Act and the Rotary Youth Exchange Program, the world's largest. All of this is part of Rotary's global thrust, one-on-one, to bring about, in the words of that retired general in the Egyptian army so long ago, a more peaceful world. Rotary's thrust in the 21st century. The beauty of it all is that no matter how much we do, we are the ones who profit the most. That's why I've done it. I made a good living as a trial lawyer. I probably could have made a lot more money if I hadn't spent so much time in Rotary work. I was singing in Las Vegas 3 shows a night under the Howard Hughes hotels. I was being paid well to sing. I probably could have made more money if I'd stayed there and sung some more. But when I was called on my first trip to India, my eyes were awakened. I couldn't understand the poverty. I couldn't understand why so many children died so early in life. I couldn't even understand why they were born in the first place. Because they lived in the streets, hungry, starving, thirsty, diseased, most of them dead by the time they were 5. And one night out on the Pakistan border, pitch black in the room where I was staying, I was so perplexed by all of this. I prayed to my God, why are these children even born? What is their function? What is their purpose? They die so early in life. And it was as if God himself said to me, Rick, don't worry about them. I will take care of them. The point is, you were meant to see them. And the question is, Rick, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And it changed my life in my early days in Rotary. So I have a friend who passed away last year, a wonderful man, a past district governor, down in Orange County. And he'd been in Rotary about 30 years. And he asked me if I wouldn't fly down to John Wayne Airport on a Thursday morning to speak to his Rotary Club, just like I'm doing today, speaking to you on Thursday at noon. So I agreed to go, and I flew down Thursday morning. This man, like most Rotarians, was a successful person. He had a beautiful big black Mercedes automobile, had a beautiful home in Orange County, had a successful floor covering business. Been in Rotary about 30 years, past district governor, good friend of mine. The minute I got into his car, he picked me up at the airport on Thursday morning when I landed. I could tell by the look on his face that he was not his usual self. And I said, Jerry, what's the matter with you today? My wife and I had an emotional experience today, Rick. With our daughter and her new husband, we went to the children's wing of the county hospital to bring home our first grandchild. And I said, congratulations. That's a red letter day in anybody's life. First child, first grandchild, what a way to go. He said, well, it was. It was very emotional because she'd been born 10 days ago on a Sunday. And the doctor told us there was less than a 50-50 chance she could survive. I didn't understand, he said, all of the medical problems. I'm not a doctor. We couldn't even see her for a week. Her mother, my daughter, was in tears the whole week. Her young husband had no idea how to console his wife. My wife, the girl's grandmother, was pretty emotional the whole week. It was not a happy time at my house all last week. For last Sunday, Rick, 1 week after her birth, and this was just 3 or 4 days before the Thursday in which I had arrived, they called us and said, okay, we think we've elevated her to 50-50. If you want to come and see your grandchild, you can come for a few moments today. So we all piled into the car, Rick. You know, when you go to a children's wing to see a very sick child at the hospital, and it's your own child, it's not much fun. We went into a room, all whitewashed and clinical, you know, where one patient about this big was lying there, fighting for life, hooked up to a big machine with tubes and wires all over the place. You know how they do, he said. And Carol and I put our arms around each other and we wept. We prayed. He said, Rick, I felt so helpless. I wanted so much to do something to will my grandchild to life. And then he said, Rick, I got the shock of my life. Because there in the corner of the machine was the rotary wheel. I rubbed my eyes, couldn't believe it. And I went over and I stared at it, and underneath there was a little plaque. And it said, this machine was donated by the Rotary Club of Orange. My club, he said. My mind raced back 3 years earlier when the president of the club stood up and said, the children's wing of the county hospital needs a new machine. It isn't going to be cheap. It's going to cost $1 million. But we are Rotarians. We are accustomed to getting things done. We are successful people. And the president said, I think we can do it. So he said, Rick, I wrote a check. I thought I should set an example. I'm a past district governor, been in Rotary 30 years. and I wrote a check to the hospital fund. Because you know, Rick, Rotary is always asking for a little of our money. And then he said, I sold beer and hot dogs at the club fundraiser at the county fair. Because you know, Rick, Rotary is always asking for a little of our time. And I forgot all about it, he said. I've been in Rotary 3 decades. How many checks? How many projects? How many hot dogs in 30 years? I forgot all about it. Until last Sunday. When that machine was keeping my first grandchild alive. And he broke down and he wept ashamedly on my chest. And he said, Rick, how did we ever get so lucky to belong to a club that's always asking us to give? Because you can't give it away. Sooner or later, one way or another, always and inevitably, it comes back. We become the more truly human man, the more truly human woman. So I commend you for your work. I commend you for your participation. Thank you. The second President of the United States, John Adams, put it this way. Only 2 kinds of people really count in this world, he said. Those people who make commitments and those people who keep them. And we who are privileged to wear the Rotary wheel are obligated to do both. Thank you for your service. God bless you. And you're over 10.
It's a bad, it's not.
Thank you very much.